Is there will in an organisation to actually change, right? Are we talking lip service? Do people actually understand what's involved? That is where the entire culture gets set, right at the very top of the organisation. Of course, you can have people sort of milling about, but the people who are in the organisation self-select to be in an organisation because they can always walk, right? And they do. And the people who generally stay are the ones who are happiest being in possibly the environment that is absent of trust. So it has to start at the top. And I remember there was the CTO at the time, he started off this hashtag on our Slack called Share the Fail.
Love that.
Yeah. So, you know, you screw up, you miss your train, post it on the all company thing. I missed my train, you know, that's a mundane example. Or I crashed the entire electoral database by accident. That never happened, by the way, right? I'm just trying to think of something utterly catastrophic. Hashtag Share the Fail. You know, and people in leadership trying to demonstrate that that is the way they want to do things. The Chief People Officer, Colette, amazing woman, right, published all of her objectives for the coming year so that everybody could see very clearly what she was trying to do with the organisation and could align to her if they wanted and support her.
Thanks, Ciarán, for coming on to the podcast today.
Hey, Daisy.
Really looking forward to sort of understanding a bit more about your experience and some advice that you have to give for other leaders that are going through, you know, transformations and similar programs that you've been through in the past. Before we get into it, we'd love to start with some context, a bit of background, in terms of kind of what's been going on in your world.
Well, a bit about me. I'm Ciarán Hanway. Do you know, I had to think about this the other day. 25 years, a quarter of a century been doing this stuff. It's kind of frightening how long that's been.
And time flies as well, isn't it?
You
think 25.
Yeah, and most of it's been fun. You know, time flies when you're having fun. And the transformation thing has just been a sort of an evolution. I ended up in this career by accident. I actually trained to be a historian and then a diplomat, and that didn't sort of happen the way I wanted it to. And I found myself like writing SQL, you know, database code for a big retailer. It was the Carphone Warehouse, maybe you remember them years ago. And I was just working on that, doing some business analysis then and project management, and sort of an epiphany came for me in around 2006 where I joined a consultancy called Conchango, which back then was a pretty sort of, you know, heavy-hitting agency in London. And I trained with a guy called Mike Cohn, and Mike Cohn is a bit leading thinker in Agile. So I did my certified Scrum Master with him and spent a bit of time suddenly realizing that you can deliver value by unlocking the potential of people, right? It doesn't have to be about Gantt charts and, is this thing 95% done? And well, does that, you know, like it's not really meant to be about that. And there's a better way than this sort of top-down command and control kind of way of doing things. And I had a lot of success actually with Agile. And Agile was kind of the buzzword, the flavor of the month at the time, right? And just found myself running larger and larger programs in sort of, you know, in gaming and in e-commerce, replatforming e-commerce. And then I ended up sort of realizing that a lot of the programs that I delivered, even though we were trying to unlock the potential of people, a lot of the programs I was delivering were often in spite of the organization that we were in, not because of it. So it was all it felt to me as though my role as a, you know, a change person was all about kind of trying to swim uphill, like a salmon going upriver, right? And surely there's got to be a better way. Like, why does salmon swim up river, actually? You know, why not swim down river or change the course of the river? And there's got to be a better way. And is this really what I want for my kids? You know, do I want my kids to work in an organisation where it's sort of political and stressful and people are in their boxes and what? No, I don't really. I want to work somewhere where I'd be proud for my kids to work. And that's sort of what got me into the, latterly, you know, with working in the government. So I worked for a consultancy that did a lot of government work, trying to do agile transformations there, trying to help those organisations just become better at unlocking the potential of their people, unlocking the potential of their technology and processes. So that's kind of how I got to here.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I think a lot of leaders can have this mindset of there's the real work and then there's like this soft work piece as well. And the real work being
Yeah.
like the hardcore nitty-gritty stuff within like transformation projects, and then the soft work being like the cultural piece and the looking after people, the understanding their motivations and goals. But I think that part is absolutely key, right? If you haven't got like your people on board on the journey with you, like how can it be successful? And from your side, did you see that? Did you kind of join a environment where the culture was in a bad spot and made you then realise this is the thing that needs to be unlocked in order to be successful? Was it from like a bad experience yourself that then kind of opened your eyes to that?
Yeah, I mean, I better not name names, but I did a publishing gig, like with a major sort of newspaper title, and that was just brutal. The environment there, just the culture of fear, and I'm not even sure how family friendly this room is, so perhaps I better not even relate the stories. But I did see people being abused basically in their work, and that's got to get in the way of delivering good value and good outcomes. People who aren't happy, and they weren't happy, you could tell they weren't, and so I saw that was really getting in the way of doing anything useful. And I've seen patterns, but even then, like, it doesn't even have to be as radically crazy as that. It could be even working in a civil service environment where people are really, really very clear, and good luck to them as well. Like, I spend a lot of time working in the private sector. In the private sector, you work up into your next role, right? And you don't get recognised for it until you've done it long enough, and then people will tap you on the shoulder and say, Daisy, you've done great. You're promoted now. Thanks for working in that upper job. You're now moved up into that upper job. I was doing transformations with the civil service where people would refuse to step into that opportunity until it had been cleared and that their grade was moved up.
Yeah.
And so and why would that be? Because the trust wasn't there.
Yeah.
That would later be recognised. Possibly a union relationship was getting in the way. So that it doesn't have to necessarily be because of an evil environment. It could be with a very well-intentioned set of processes or operating principles that just get in the way of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you, foster or encourage a culture of trust? Like, especially, I guess, if you join an organisation where that has always been the way, or it goes back so far where that like trust just isn't there. Have you been able to overcome that in the past?
It comes from, ultimately, there's got to be a basic mandate from leadership, right? Is this what we still want for our business? Because that is where the entire culture gets set, right at the very top of the organisation.
Yeah.
Of course, you can have people sort of milling about, but the people who are in the organisation self-select to be in an organisation because they can always walk, right? And they do. And the people who generally stay are the ones who are happiest being in possibly the environment that is absent of trust. So it has to start at the top. I don't think it's fair or reasonable to expect somebody doing a transformation of any kind, right? And we're not even talking about any of the technicalities around doing an organisation, like how do you, a transformation, how do you even make it happen, and that. We're still talking about the quote-unquote fluffy stuff around culture, aren't we? None of that can happen without that leadership and that intentionality around change. I saw good examples of that. Like, I used to work for an organisation called Kainos. Fantastic. Still is a fantastic consultancy based out of Belfast. And the leadership was very, very, very open to suggestions on how to change things, including if they were called out publicly, at all hands and whatever. You would see policy change after that. And I remember there was the CTO at the time, he started off this hashtag on our Slack called Share the Fail.
Love that.
Yeah. So, you screw up, you miss your train, post it on the all company thing. I missed my train, that's a mundane example. Or I crashed the entire electoral database by accident. That never happened, by the way, right? I'm just trying to think of something utterly catastrophic. Hashtag Share the Fail. And people in leadership trying to demonstrate that is the way they want to do things. The Chief People Officer, Colette, amazing woman, right, published all of her objectives for the coming year so that everybody could see very clearly what she was trying to do with the organisation and could align to her if they wanted and support her.
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's failure is one of those things people are like they shy away from it, right? And it's like it can be seen as such a negative thing, but it's really like those opportunities where you grow and where you learn and where you actually develop. That's why something I try to like encourage with my team, and that's why I'm always quite open with like my form of leadership, and I do quite similar to that the chief people officer that you mentioned.
Yes.
With my team, and it also helps to hold you to account as well, right? To deliver like what it is that you're
Exactly. It's like they say when you're quitting, if you want to quit smoking, you should tell all your friends I'm quitting smoking, right? Yeah. And they will support you. And the opposite of being very open about your failure and whatnot is I call it the Darth Vader school of change, right? So I don't know if you know your Star Wars. Yeah, but in the oh, of course you do. Yeah. That gave me a fright. That did. I thought your security's pretty good. So yeah, in Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader arrives for his project update, lands in his shuttle, and then you've got the terrified commander. We're running behind schedule. Failure is not an option. All this stuff, right? And no wonder they lost. Yeah. Right. So.
I've heard that analogy before, but I like it. Makes a lot of sense.
I don't know, it's a bit of a stretch. We're not building Death Stars, but you know what I mean.
Well, never know. I guess in terms of common pitfalls that you do see then, so obviously there's that cultural piece, and I guess it being sort of from top down. What are other patterns that you have seen, or problems that have come up in the past, like over time and throughout like the projects that you've worked in previously? Yeah,
why don't we flip it around to like how things should work? Because I feel like we're talking about problems, like solutions. Yeah, don't come to me with problems. So I think you need three things, right? I think you need will, you need empowerment, and you need direction, right? So what do I mean by will? Like, is there will in an organisation to actually change, right? Are we talking lip service? Do people actually understand what's involved? So I had a client recently who wanted to build a product, right? But they had absolutely no concept about what they really wanted to build. Right? And that's a really, really common pattern. Sadly, what's also common is they had no kind of desire to challenge their own thinking around the product. So we want to build a thing, a widget, let's call it a widget. We want to build this widget. We think it's a good idea. We're going to build the widget. Cool. Have you talked to any customers? No, we just know it's a good idea, right? This thing isn't going to sell if you build a widget that customers don't want to buy, right? I'm speaking very vaguely, again, for confidentiality. And the will is still not, let's explore it. Let's build a biz case. Let's go and talk to people. Let's do a product discovery, or at least some kind of, understanding of what we're getting into here before you commit millions of pounds into this project, right? So is the will there to change? So a really, really good friend of mine, former colleague, has a thing called the photocopier test, right? So you'll know that a lot of companies will want to do hot desking, and they'll want to get people arranged into pods, teams around desks, to work on a particular project, right? I had a client about 15 years ago. No, God, has it been more than that? A long time ago. They were trialing Agile. Let's do this Agile way of working. Yeah. Right, brilliant, excellent. Okay, we'll need to sit together in a war room. No, can't have that. What? Yeah, no, if you want to move desks, we've got to fill in a form and get it signed off by the CEO. Sorry, what? And you want to be more agile. And you want that decision about desks to go through the CEO. Yeah. And his test is the photocopier test. Hey, we want to make all of these significant changes in the way that we work. We believe our will is there. Okay, all right. I don't like where that photocopier is. Can we move it just to the other side of the office? Yeah. No, we absolutely can't. Okay, if you can't move a photocopier, you're not going to be able to move your business on, right? So is the will there, and is the ground fertile, for the concepts that you're trying to do? Right? Yeah. And then the other bit is around empowerment, right? Back to that CEO with the desks. You want to push decision making down as far as possible, as far as is responsible, down into the lowest possible levels. And you kind of need to also set a direction with them. That's the other point, right, is the direction. what is the business trying to achieve? In theory, you should be able to tap on anybody's shoulder and say, what are you doing and how does it contribute to the whole? Now, in business, we don't do this very well. You know, and there are some examples we can touch on. But in other environments, so in the British Army, for example, they have this concept called mission command. I don't know if you heard of it. Right. So if you're being, I'm probably butchering this massively, right? But if you're being like trained to be an officer, like a lieutenant or whatever, that's lieutenant for our American listeners, right? If you're being trained to be a lieutenant, you know, you might be like doing an exercise where you're in the field and you've got your little team and you go, right, we need to capture that hill over there. Okay. So what I need you to do, all of you, is stand up, turn right, walk forwards 100 meters, stop, turn left, walk forwards 100 meters, climb the hill, blah, 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 blah. You're just fired on the spot, right? That's nuts. The right way to go about it is to say, we need to capture that hill. Why? Because that hill will allow us to fire on the enemy down in that valley, whatever the case may be. That valley is important because it fits into this sort of like sector, and this sector is important because it's the turning point in the theatre of war, and we're fighting this war because we want to beat the blue team or whatever you know, whatever, right? Can you just go and get the hill? Think of a plan together. So why is that a better option? Well, because as the commander, you can't be there all the time with the troops, right? And if you're making yourself you catch a bullet, you're out. What does that do for your they can't now independently think. And we need to work a lot better at pushing that load, that empowerment down into teams, because you can't be a CEO who's always signing off desk plans, right? You've got better things to be doing with your time. And you've got to, and people who are empowered, get purpose and meaning out of their work are infinitely more productive, right? But it's got to be real empowerment. It can't be just like, be empowered and go and do some work, but I'm going to trample all over whatever you do. Like, it can't be, you can't have it both ways. If you're going to do this, you've got to jump in. That comes back to the will.
What are the best ways to empower, would you say?
I think that ties into the last part around the direction, right? I think you've got to be super, super clear about what is it we're trying to build as a business, or how is what you're doing really, really going to help our business? And then you've got our permission. Like, what's quite nice in Agile is this idea of a product owner. So a product owner will effectively, like, here's £1 million. Like, you've come up with a biz case. Here's £1 million. You're going to 10x that million by building this product. That's fine. I'm not going to like hang you on the various features that you're going to build. I just want to see a return on that investment. And if that's going to change, let me know. As long as it's sort of directionally aligned to what we're trying to do, I don't care if the login box is green or yellow, right? I don't really care. I just would like to see a good return on my investment, which is a reasonable thing to be asking. So, I mean, where this has happened incorrectly, I think, you know, around the direction part, is I was working on a transformation with an organisation. Sorry, I'm so cagey. And they were really, really struggling to balance a few things, right? So they were an organisation that billed people. So they would send a bill every month or every quarter to their customers. They were an organisation that needed to get good customer satisfaction. They were trying to increase their customer satisfaction scores. And they had a regulatory requirement on them that they had to hit, like a target, a productivity target. And again, I'm being vague, right? And they had these three things. And this team was struggling to balance those three things. So I sat down with them, actually with the lead there, and I said to her, right, what are we going to do here? We need to sort of try and optimize this value stream that you're working to, like, so we can understand where all the pinch points are in your processes and just optimize for that. She's like, yeah. What are we going to optimize for, right? Because you could drive up customer satisfaction by not charging anyone anything, right? You could drop all their bills to zero. Everybody's happy, right? So do you want to do? Well, no, obviously that's absurd, right? So how do we balance satisfaction with, revenue with this regulatory requirement? But which of those three is the most important? Is it the regulatory thing? And she said, I've been here 8 years, I still don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, how can you run a team if you don't know what you're supposed? How do you climb Everest by accident? You don't.
No. So, do you find that it's common when you step into organisations for them not to be a clear direction and a clear route?
It's the number one thing I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it always has to come back to first principles. What are you trying to do here? And it's just such an obvious question. And so you feel like a bit of a fraud going in and asking that question. But sometimes
they don't know the answer.
Or they sit in that discomfort.
Yeah.
and I wouldn't say you become happy about it, but you kind of get just used to it.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you do need an external fresh pair of eyes to come in.
Yeah.
And if you're an internal person, as a quote-unquote consultant internally, you've got to keep moving around the organisation so you don't kind of get stale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just be candid about, or not afraid about asking questions. Back to the trust point, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's okay to be ignorant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stupid is not asking. All right. So just ask those questions. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, because chances are everybody's wondering the same thing.
Yeah.
But nobody's wanting to ask.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy because you see the same patterns time and time again. But what I've noticed, especially with like the bigger enterprise businesses, is you said about people getting comfy. Sort of. Well, you mentioned about being comfortable within that kind of structure. I think it is something like discomfort. Discomfort is obviously uncomfortable, right? And it like pushes people to have to step outside of their comfort zone. And when you are in like an organisation for so long and there isn't like strive to change or to be better or to transform, it kind of just feels like, okay, this isn't my job to do then.
Yeah.
And I think like when we're working with organisations and we put in kind of like fractional people in to support on a project, that fresh set of eyes and perspective just, you know, can be crazy how much, you know, it can then help to transform, because I think people don't actually realise how stuck they are until somebody else comes in and kind of like pushes that agenda through. It's
profound, and in a way, because you're the new kid on the block sort of thing, you got that permission to ask the quote-unquote dumb questions, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay. We're like, why are we doing this exactly? What's the most important thing? You know, I mean, quite often I just sit down with teams and I build like a framework for what they're doing. You know, like what are like a prioritization framework? Like, what's all the work we're doing here? All right, how much of that can we just chuck away?
Yeah.
You know, how long's that ticket been sitting in your queue, or how long's that initiative been on your desk? Oh, 4 years.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Do you really need it? Because like it's sitting there. I don't know about you, but I've got to-do lists all over the place in the house. I'm rubbish at doing this in my personal life, right? I've got to-do lists all over the place that I need to do. I've got 2 children. Life's chaos. Never-ending stuff to do, right? Yeah. And that stuff weighs on your mind. You know, you're lying in bed at night and you think, oh man, I didn't put the bins out, right? You know. Yeah. So just get rid of that. That all takes up kind of like management bandwidth. Just get rid of the stuff you don't need to do.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned about will. Something that we assess internally, if things aren't necessarily on track, or you know, we're not where we need to be with certain projects or with winning new clients, whatever it might be. Like we'll always assess whether it's like a skill or will thing, and then we can obviously then make the right decision from that point onwards. But we find that a lot of the time, obviously there is that skill, you know, there is that will piece, and when there is that will piece, it can be a problem. You have to make some difficult, you know, choices, but a lot of the time when you actually make that assessment, it is just the skill piece, and people are willing, but they're just not, you know, like I guess just at that point capable of being able to do the thing. But it helps for us to not make kind of rash decisions on things.
Yeah.
Right? But it's always an interesting assessment to take a look at, because I'm sure there are also on the flip side that people that are willing to push through but might not just have the skill, you know. And those are often the people.
And those are the people you want to have, right? Yeah. Because they're hungry, they're curious, and you know that's kind of what we want from people. It's the people who just don't want to, you know, it's like the Fatboy Slim kid, you know, on the cover of his album. You know, I'm number one, so I try harder. We don't really want those people. Well, I don't.
Yeah, no, me neither. No. But that's really interesting, and I think when we're touching on the kind of world of GreenTech, obviously. Something that's becoming, you know, more and more important. It's been spoken about a lot more. I think, you know, there's definitely a huge it is a huge area of focus, hopefully anyway, for most organisations now. What's your kind of take on how you can effectively, I guess, how you can foster, you know, green tech while you're transforming organisations?
Look, I mean, I don't know. That's the answer, because sometimes it's a shoehorning in thing. So I worked with a company that had a lot of just unusable land for any other purpose, right? And in the end, they decided to shove solar panels all over it. Fantastic. Like, we can't use it. We're going to put solar panels on it. Brilliant. Like, I think without a doubt, let me just flip it backwards, right? We're talking about transformation. The number one transformation challenge for us as a species is what we do to answer climate change.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to be profound. You've got idiots running around in power at the moment fantasizing about terraforming Mars.
I won't say that.
Right? Okay, I like sci-fi as much as anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, you've heard my Vader thing, right? I like sci-fi as much as anyone. Why are we thinking about terraforming, Mars when we need to terraform this planet,
Yeah.
right? When we're doing the opposite to this planet, what is the point other than shareholder value, right? So you got that. The green tech, the green sector, the CBI report came out about a month ago. It is the fastest growing sector in this country. You know, the Chancellor is talking about, we need to be working more efficiently and productively so that we can kind of get past the economic malaise that we're in, and we need to get out of that. Green jobs are 40% more efficient or more productive than the average job. The industry is growing 3 times as fast as the rest of the economy. It's massive, right? Or at least it could be. Now, I know, like, big growth on small numbers, looks good from a growth perspective and maybe not from an absolute, but it's still bigger than the UK marketing industry, right? Than the entire UK marketing industry. We're famous for this, right? So there's a lot of potential, and if we don't get it right, never mind an organisation that I'd be proud for my kids to work in, or what about a planet I'd be proud for my kids to live on, right? So I think there's a lot. I think we saw in the press, things like Insulate Britain and all their protests that they were doing, clogging up the roads. So whatever you think of their tactics, Insulate Britain had a point, right? Our housing stock is woefully uninsulated. I mean, it's dreadful. So my own place, I insulated the outside. Costs a lot of money. Yeah. It's beans and rice from now on. Okay.
I'm a celebrity, get me out.
Yeah, but it's so warm.
Yeah.
And then we looked at things like heat pumps and solar and all of that. So there's a government grant at the moment for heat pumps. The government has a target of 600,000 air source heat pumps every year to be installed in our housing stock, which is going to drop the carbon emissions massively.
Yeah.
I don't have the numbers in my head. Last year, they did 42,000, and the year before they did 40,000, right? Using this grant. Every year we replace 1.5 million gas boilers. So I'd sort of worked this out on a growth rate of 40 to 42, and I took a few other years, whatever, and I worked out the growth rates. We are going to hit the government's target, the 2028 target of 600,000 heat pumps per year, replacing boilers. We're going to hit that target in the year 2094.
Wow.
Right? That is just far too late.
Yeah.
Right? On current projections, sea levels are going to rise a metre by 2100. 800 million people at a minimum are going to be displaced. Yeah? You have these mouth breathers who are complaining about immigration and can't afford it and blah, blah, blah. Well, how much are you going to enjoy having 800 million people moving north, right? Because it's just going to happen, right? People want to live, and who can blame them? We have to sort this out. And, how can organisations do this? Honestly, on an organisation by organisation basis, I don't know. I'm worried. Yeah. I'm actually very worried.
Is it something that you spoke about a lot, or is it kind of pushed to the side?
I think we all know that a compound annual growth rate on the value of our stocks in our pensions and whatever, people say, oh, think about 5%, when you're doing your financial. That is an exponential curve in a finite world. There are only so many trees we can cut down. There's only so much coal. Okay, yeah, we can go to Mars then. But this extreme aggressive growth is not sustainable in our planet. We're like, human beings are like a virus with shoes. What are we doing, right? That's a Bill Hicks line. What are we doing, right? How are we going to sustain this? And I don't know the answer. And the thing that scares me, because I've got to say it, because, it's the trend right now, is AI. Everybody says AI. If we'd had this conversation 4 years ago, we'd be saying blockchain, right? Yeah. But it's AI this week, right? The amount of energy it takes to train one model, one new LLM, right, is equivalent to the average home in the UK's energy consumption for 10 years.
Wow.
For 10 years to create these models. And they're going to unlock massive, massive value. Don't get me wrong, right? The value is that, for example, if you imagine, like about 15 years ago, big thing was like around personalizing your web experience, your browsing experience. Daisy, I see that you like really cool, kick-ass waistcoats.
I like that.
Yeah, here are some awesome new waistcoats. And have you considered a funky scarf to go with it? Well, I'm not a stylist, so just hear me out, right? And that's really, really cool. And that would have been quite often hand cranked and whatever. I built a couple of these in the past, right? But imagine now you go to a site and they know it's you. The site knows it's you. And the browsing experience is completely different from your friends. Completely. Yeah. The images are different. They're all procedurally generated. The product lineups are all different. They've integrated amazing drop shipping and other logistics stuff that's also AI optimized. We've solved the salesman's paradox, right? Whatever it is, the mathematical problem around calculating the optimum route for transits. It's a consistent problem in computer science. And imagine that, right? The value that can be unlocked to get you to buy more stuff, to then spend air miles or freighter miles shipping it to you, right? It's going to be massive, right? So we're going to spend loads of energy training models and running models, like server farms are going to just suck up so much power to then run factories to make more waistcoats. I mean, it's a nice waistcoat, but you don't need 50 of them, right? Yeah. Do we need 1,000 different varieties of toothpaste? Yeah. So my worry is all of that energy is going to get consumed. And this is something that was touched on by William Stanley Jevons in 1865. There you go. I did say I tried to be a historian once. Right. Although it wasn't, it wasn't my period. My period was like the fall of communism and things like that, right? And there was this idea that there was a shortage of coal back then, right? And people were predicting that this new steam engine, Watt's new engine, which was hyper efficient, was going to drive down the demand for coal. Result. Jevons said, actually, no, I think it's going to do the opposite. And he was right. And the reason that it did the opposite and actually drove up the consumption of coal was, yes, it made consumption of coal more efficient to do work. But these new engines were really, really practical, cheaper to run, so therefore could be considered to use in other contexts. And instead of just pushing trains around, they could be used for pumping water or for turning factory or whatever it was. And so the overall aggregate consumption went up massively. The answer can't be let's make a more optimized, more efficient set of LLMs, right? Yeah. I mean, bear in mind, like everything I'm talking about with all of this power consumption, currently only 4% of the population of the planet is using this stuff, right? What if it gets bigger? Yeah. Yeah. Like there are S curves for the adoption of various technologies, be it computers or whatever. Mobile phones, by far and away, have been the fastest technology adoption in history,
Yeah.
basically, because they're portable, they can move around. Right. Imagine everybody around the world now with a smartphone that's accessing an AI that's sucking power. I don't think it's inconceivable that we get to 80%, right? Yeah. Like, what are we going to be doing?
Yeah.
So we've got to put, I think we have to put caps. If you want to call yourself a sustainable company, you can say, we cap our use of AI.
Yeah.
Right?
It's so hard, isn't it? Because where do you draw the line? Because there's being ethical and sustainable, but then there's watching your competitors beat you, and it's when there isn't those legislations or laws in place or caps. It's do you lose the opportunity or do you be ethical? And it's kind of like a face-off.
It's a real problem. It's a real problem, and that's the problem, isn't it? It can be a race to the bottom, and if we're not careful, it'll be a race to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a worry. But don't think I'm a Luddite, because I'm not. Yeah. Right. But I just think it would be nice if we stopped thinking about terraforming Mars.
Yeah.
And try to make this planet a bit nicer.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's a hard one because everyone just wants to get their hands on it, don't they? They want it integrated into their business. They don't even know what they're going to do with it, but they're going to do something. And I've had a few conversations with clients where it's like, do you even need to use it right now? Is it something that's actually going to be beneficial, or are you just doing it because everyone else is and because it's AI? Well,
I was product managing something, and one of our stakeholders said, look, can you, and it was very, very simple, basically scheduler, whatever, right? And he said, for marketing, and he said, can you make this AI? I was like, well, but what problem are you trying to solve with it, right? This is actually quite a simple product platform that we're building. It's like, no, I need you to sort of put AI in it.
Yeah.
Okay, but why? And he said, well, because I'm going to go and I'm going to pitch this to other organisations' boards, right? And I'm going to try and get them to use this platform. And I said, let's call him Fred. Fred, if this had been 4 years ago, you'd have said blockchain, right? And he said, yeah, I would have done. So it's just the badge.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of hype that dissipates after this.
Yeah.
But how much damage are we going to do?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's funny, even from a recruitment perspective, we'll have clients that say, we need an AI engineer, and then we'll take a brief and we'll scope out what it is they're looking for, and they're literally just looking for a software engineer, or
yes,
it's all these crazy job titles that are now coming up with AI in at some point. It's is this really necessary?
We need an AI engineer with 25 years AI experience. What?
We need an AI designer, or no, it's this isn't. You don't actually need that. You just need a designer. It's funny, but it also is very serious. It's and I don't think a lot of businesses aren't necessarily have that foresight or are thinking too much longer term at the moment. It's more so what we're doing this right now, rather than the how and the why and the what.
Exactly. And so this comes back. It's a nice circle back, right? As the Americans say, let's circle back, right? It circles.
Donald Trump there.
Oh God, don't. Did it? Oh, okay. Yikes. I'm going to go and get that checked. Thank you. I'll call my doctor later. No, but it sort of comes back to that theme around direction, right? And value. What do people really want? And what is the direction of our business going to be to meet that need?
Yeah.
And there I'm mixing up needs and wants.
Yeah.
It's very, very clear that we talk about what people need rather than what they want.
Yeah.
Because that Fred, in that example, wanted AI. Did he need AI? Did his customers need AI?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one. It's not like it's too relevant, but I always speak to my team in the same way. I've always asked them how do you like to be managed, and they tell me. But recently I've kind of flipped it to how do you need to be managed, and it when you ask something in a slightly different way, you get more. You get more from it, you get more out of it. It's what do you need from this, rather than what would you like to do with it? It's two totally different questions, and then it hopefully opens up the opportunity for people to say, actually, I don't need to do this right now. So yeah.
Well, they're lucky to have you, Daisy.
Well, okay.
There was a writer years ago called Jerry Weinberg. He just made me think of him, right? So he called himself the father of consulting. I don't know how true that is, right? I think he did a project at NASA back in the day, and he worked at Ford building the Edsel, which was a car that had all the latest features and was a complete disaster of a launch. Yeah. But and he was also a writer and everything. And I went on a training course with him in Albuquerque, of all places, New Mexico. But he wrote a book called The Secrets of Consulting, and he had this bunch of laws, right? Law number one was, no matter what your client says, there's always a problem. Yeah. There always is. Yeah. Right? And number two was, no matter how it seems at first, it's always a people problem. And I always take that away, because organisations are just groups of people, and the processes are put in by
people.
Right. Yeah. And the problems, therefore, all come from people working together. And always, and who gets out of bed and thinks, I'm going to be a complete bastard today? Nobody. Everybody is in the centre of their own universe, right, where they are the hero, and they're trying to do the best that they possibly can. And I think if you've got to go into trying to solve those problems that way. And what you're saying to your team, what do you need from me? That's perfect servant leadership. That is. Oh,
thanks. Yeah. That's the style I've always tried to take. I think it is definitely the most effective. It's what's needed, and I take a lot from what I learn when I speak to people that are running transformations and have led programs into my day to day as well. Because obviously it's different, but there's a lot of similarities, and like you say, no matter what, it always does relate back to the people in those projects. And for me, like, my main priority is them. So yes, it's interesting.
And you know what as well? We're talking about transformation. Probably, I don't know who the audience will be necessarily, but you'll probably have a bunch of corporate types. Have we talked today about Gantt charts? Have we talked about RAID logs? Have we talked about governance process? Have we talked about any of the mechanisms of doing it? No, because that's all cranking a handle. Yeah. But it's the leadership difference is the difference, I think. Yeah, sure. The direction, the will, the empowerment. Because if those things are missing, and if you're not unlocking your people's potential, forget it.
Yeah. And how do you see, we've obviously touched on AI, how do you see that kind of impact in the future of the workforce? I think design is something that is coming up again and again. We see sort of some roles that could potentially, I guess, come in redundant, and service design probably being an area that I'd be interested to sort of touch on with you. So what's your kind of take on it?
It's massive. It just feels like we're rerunning kind of like the 90s and noughties, of like the whole SAP stuff and trying to sort of digitize processes, and we're just rerunning it now, but now with an AI flavor. And there may be people having to shift the work that they do, but I don't know. I hope I'm right. I think a lot of this is overblown. Yeah. Like, I don't think there's going to be massive waves of redundancies. I think processes are going to be improved, and companies are going to realise that they can unlock more value by putting this stuff in. So I did a load of data warehousing work back in the early noughties with insurance companies, and we eliminated so much drudgery work, running these models and whatnot. We automated them. And I remember, like, as a sort of a young sort of starter, I remember saying to an actuary, "This is great, you won't have anything to do." And she, all the colour went from her face. My boss kind of elbowed me in the ribs and was like, "You could be phrasing this slightly differently." And she's still there, she's still working there, and doing great, right? Because now she's having next level, higher order thinking and not having to be involved in the drudgery. Yeah. So I'm hoping that the future looks like processes and the way that people work and whatever are going to be augmented rather than replaced by AI. Having gone on my big rant about how we shouldn't overuse the damn stuff, right? I use it a lot. Yeah. So I think there's an augmentation point. I think, look, one of the big, and you've probably heard this a million times, one of the big changes has been the pandemic, the apocalypse that we had in 2020, which clearly dreadful in so many ways, but actually pretty great in some others, right? This whole hybrid way of working. And people aren't in the office so much anymore, and people aren't co-located as much as they used to be to solve a problem. So we've got to think to ourselves, well, having a foosball table in the office and, you know, a beer fridge and snack fridge and whatever else was really, really great in the noughties, right, and the tens maybe, right? But that's not enough now. Everyone's got their own foosball and snack fridges at home. So what is it that's going to keep people feeling part of an organisation and pulling together in the same direction? It comes back to culture, right? You know, culture is the way that people behave when they think no one's looking, right? And when you're not in the office, you haven't got everybody looking at you. Yeah. So I think the big difference will be all the way back up at the leadership, showing what good looks like and what's expected from people, the kind of organisation that you want your kids to be in.
How did you drive the right culture working remotely for the first time throughout the pandemic? Were there certain things that were put in place, or do you feel like the business that you was working in at that time had a strong enough culture that it just was able to withstand that change of setup?
So I moved from a very strongly defined culture company into another in 2020. And in the first one, there was a real clear, and also things were shifting during the pandemic, if you recall. You know, at the very sort of beginning, it was like, oh God, what are we going to do? Yeah. And then we're all in it together, and we're all going to look after each other, guys and girls, right? And then as it became kind of the new normal, things sort of evolved a little bit, I think. And so it's very difficult to compare the company that I was in at the beginning of the pandemic to the company that I was in midway through the pandemic. So it's very different. But what they both had in common was, you know, repeatedly reassuring people that they were valued, repeatedly creating forums, and again, it's online, right? But creating forums where people were encouraged to come and share. So, you know, one way of reinforcing that sort of the cross-linking across verticals in organisation is through things like communities of practice, right? So, you know, you might have a product management community of practice where you have product management in different groups, because that's the way you make change happen, is you need to like break stuff down into smaller kind of teams, hit squads. So you might have a product management community of practice, a data and AI one, you know, service design, which I know we want to talk about as well. And those can build that collaborative knowledge sharing, you know, you've got a problem, that sounds like something that I had, here's how I solved it. I offer that to you, right? Not telling you how to do your job, but I'm offering that to you as an idea, right? And so I think that's how you can get strength, is by that cross-linking across the organisation. Yeah,
it's interesting because I think COVID obviously forced that onto a lot of businesses, right? That like cohesion and trust. I think it made companies realise that they need to have, I guess, the importance of a strong culture, because that was the absolute pinnacle of businesses being able to survive or not throughout that period of time. So I think it's something that I've noticed since then has been spoke about more and more in comparison to you know, pre-COVID. So yeah, it's an interesting one. And yeah, I guess service design. We touched on it briefly. But it'd be interesting to know your thoughts on how you see that kind of changing and adapting, given, you know, the changes within the industry, how people are utilising AI. I guess like the difference you see across organisations.
It's going to be a wild ride. So it's going to help massively accelerate things like a product discovery. Right, where you're trying to work out, well, do people need what we're doing? Rapidly prototyping stuff using LLMs, fantastic, really helpful. There are people I know who are working on, you know, if you think about designing a product, the old way you do it maybe 10 years ago, you do scamps, you do like paper prototypes, and you go around, you go to a bar, and you say, what do you think? Where would you touch on the page to make this work? And you kind of learn, or you know, you'd learn stuff. I did a project with the prison service years ago. It was just fascinating, you know. Like, if you don't do this, your product will fail, right? If you don't go to the place where the people use the thing and see how they use it, you will fail. So for an example being the prisons, right? we were building stuff for people who visit loved ones in prison. So I went to prison. Right? You can clip that out. You can clip that bit out. I went to prison. Yeah, I went to prison. Right. I actually got stuck there. They had a lockdown in the. Yeah, there was an incident. So we were locked in with the governor, right?
Yeah.
And like.
At least it wasn't with a prisoner.
Yeah, it was a really hot day as well, and the aircon had failed. It was pretty. Oh man, it was pretty horrendous. But we discovered we had built this fairly complicated like workflow for this product that we were building to help people visit their loved ones in prison, right? And we took it and sat in the waiting rooms to talk to people who were about to visit their loved ones in prison. I keep saying this, right? What we discovered was they had no way of understanding because we were all grads, we were all like people who designed stuff before, who were conversant with like clicking and mouse pointers and all of this you'd sort of take for granted because we've grown up with this technology.
Yeah.
A lot of these people hadn't. A lot of the language we were using was bad. Why was it bad? Because we were right. They didn't, no. So the average reading age of an adult in prison is 11.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So from a socioeconomic perspective, so too are the visitors, right? So we had to simplify everything. I'm not trying to be rude or patronising. I'm trying to make something accessible, right? It's really, really important because if you can't access and use a product, it's not a useful product, right? So you've got to do that basic work. Now, I think back to your question about AI, I just really felt it was worth establishing why it's important. To the question about AI is going to accelerate that product discovery. Maybe not for some of these edge cases, right, where you're not familiar with prison visitors, but say for a shopper. I think I can imagine that there would be agents that could be designed based on personas, user personas. Like this is Jenny. Jenny is 24. Jenny likes, I don't know, fast cars and cosmopolitans, right? Jenny is really interested in buying a new pair of jeans, right? You know what I mean by the persona, right? And you create agents with all of these things, and you can now start to test prototypes rapidly against that bench of agents. I would be very, very surprised if that wasn't available or wasn't being developed. So it will speed up product discovery. It will speed up that whole innovation cycle. It will enhance workflow, so things will become more efficient. In the back end, it'll improve things like delivery time or uptime. I think at some point, they've had quite recently, they've had a bunch of models pass the Turing test, the Turing test. So chatbot agents are going to be absolutely super. A lot of people think service design, UX design, they get the two things conflated. So service design being the bigger picture of the flow of how a process and how an interaction and how people touch a system and benefit from a system. And we've talked a bit about how AI is going to accelerate product discovery, because to me the experience of your product and the value the product brings, they're so enmeshed. I think the two overlap massively. But what's interesting to me as well, I was musing on this the other week, was interfaces. So now more onto the visual side of things. And I think that's going to change also, right? So when I sit down and I use an AI tool, it's just my keyboard and it's a prompt, right? I was thinking about this. About sort of 28 years ago, as a sort of a summer job, I was working as an apprentice database programmer to this guy, right? And I grew up near Kingston-on-Thames, right? And he went to school locally and left school and went into IT, right? And he was teaching me the basics around databases. I had no idea what I was doing, right? It's a very British malaise, this. You got sort of, people who are enthusiastic ignoramuses like me trying to learn how to do this stuff. I remember saying to him, Dave, what's a Boolean? And he went, anything that's true or false. Now, I'm a humanities graduate. I'm sitting there, anything that's true or false, man. God, that's really profound. Anything that's my thumbnail is true or false. I was like, Dave, I don't understand how this is relevant to programming. And he said, no, sorry, it's something that's true, false, or null. And I was like, Dave, what's null? Right, I mean, it was proper basic. But he was telling me that back when he was at school, he did computer science on a punch card. So he had like a card that you'd punch holes into, and then they'd send it to the university, and they'd run it through the university computer, and then in the post a week later he'd get the result, right? Crazy. And probably, my luck, it would just say like syntax error, try again, right? So that was one interface. We then moved on to CLIs, command line interfaces, where you typed stuff, right? And then you got an answer. So in my case, it would be syntax error, try again, quite quickly, right? And then we moved on to things like WYSIWYGs with the first Apple computers, right? And then later Windows and Linux and whatever. So these are mouse pointers. What you see is what you get. Or GUIs, graphical user interfaces. And that's kind of where we've sat for quite a long time doing these things. And now we're in a world where actually we're not using a mouse as much. I mean, we're using a mouse to get to the interface of the thing that we're talking to, this bot, right? So I'm calling this, and other people are calling this, I'm not like a thought leader in this at all, but linguistic user interfaces, right? These are things that you can relate to without having to think, how does a computer understand the problem I'm trying to solve? Yeah. I'm going to translate from my brain into computer brain and type into like a search engine. Mm-hmm. You know, I've over the years, I've sort of trained myself to be able to type a Google search in such a way that I know I'm not filtering out unnecessary things and I'm getting good results. Well, now LUIs, or LUIs, are, you know, meeting me rather than me meeting them. And what does this mean for service design? I mean, surely, or UX design, surely you could just go onto a site, conceivably in the future, say the Next website, you want to buy something from Next, right? And it's just a command prompt, and you just say, I really need a nice jumper. Show me a nice jumper that you've got in stock in my size, right? And then it will just do it, and then it will ship it to you. And you don't have to think as a designer about what is the product detail page looking like, and how do you navigate to the checkout, and how do you make a frictionless purchase decision, right? Because it just does it for you like a concierge, right? So I think the future for those sorts of, if that does go in that direction, it'd be interesting to see if it does. I think it would be a bit bereft. We'd be a bit of a bereft world without all the beautiful design and interface designs that we've seen before, you know. But if it does go that way, I do wonder, like, if there's going to be more discipline required around tone of voice, or, you know, making these services accessible for people in such a way that they can, you know, the LLM or the bot or whatever can understand your needs and personalize the way it responds to you even more specifically. Maybe speak in a way that you kind of get, oh yeah, I know you like jumpers, but we call them sweaters, but I'll call them jumpers. You know, that sort of thing. So tone of voice is going to be important. Probably actual voice, like technology around creating voice. And the voice is now indistinguishable. There are some really great companies that are doing animated, very realistic now, you know, live inflow agents that are perfectly human looking and in real time generated. So that could be where it's going to go. I think it would be a bit sad though if it were just Louise. Yeah,
it's interesting. Like interesting you say that. One of the clients that we work with, they've created or are in the process of creating. They're within the music industry, and they create like NFTs, and they have this like NFT products for fans to connect to the artists.
Oh yeah.
When they go to a concert, they get a wristband, and then they get access to, I don't know, VIP merch and stuff like that. And one of the things that they're building at the moment is like messages from the celebrities, and it's obviously AI, but it's so real, like personalised, let's say like a happy birthday message or something like that, and it sounds exactly the same, looks exactly the same.
Whoa.
We literally wouldn't be able to tell. Have you heard of Synthesia before?
No.
So they're a client of ours, and they basically do the same thing. We've created our own synthesis, like our own models of ourselves. So internally we have, it's actually quite funny. There's like videos of people like me speaking in like an American accent, and it looks like me and it sounds like me, but I'm American, or someone else speaking Chinese, and it's actually crazy because you look at it. Some of them, I think there's a bit, right to do. Some of them are really realistic, and some of them not so much. But it is crazy, like how much you can, I guess, how far people are pushing and like innovating.
That's terrifying, actually, right?
It's quite scary,
because nobody is going to believe anything.
Yeah, what's true and what's false.
And that, as sorry to bring it big again and like be the pub bore, but that is going to potentially destroy our democracy.
Yeah.
Right? Because if nobody believes anything and everybody is apathetic, right? Well, so that politician just said something horribly controversial or offensive or admitted to a crime. Maybe they did.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't. Who knows? And after a while, people will stop caring.
Yeah.
Right? And when they stop caring, they're going to stop engaging with politics. And, a lot of people like to say, hey, like, I don't want to be political. The problem is, if you aren't doing politics, politics is going to do you. Right, as we're seeing, right? I mean, we're sitting in a massive potential recession coming, because a lot of people just decided not to do politics.
Yeah.
So that's a worry for me. Is that can happen.
I'll show you a video after. It's one of the videos. It is quite funny. It's funny. It's scary, but it's an interesting one. But I guess, service design aside, and just kind of looking at transformations as a whole, if you had a magic wand and you can see into the future, like how do you think it's going to change, and what do you think like the world of transformation is going to look like in 10 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say within organisations, I think two big themes, right? One is democratisation of the workplace. I mean, having just said I'm worried about democracy outside the workplace, inside the workplace, massive democratisation. I don't know how much of that is necessarily going to be technology driven and just kind of like zeitgeist driven, like Gen Z and Alpha coming in and wanting to work in a different way to perhaps how, X or boomers or millennials have worked, right? So hierarchies are going to flatten, more towards squads-based working. And I think in sort of hand in hand with that will be more of an adoption of an internal consulting mindset into organisations, right? So groups of people pulled together because it's a flat hierarchy. People aren't going to go, that's not my job, I'm not in that team, right? People are going to be pulled together for particular missions in their work, and a mission could be like a year, or it could be 6 months, or whatever, projects. People are going to get a lot more variety from their work, and people who are effective and get stuff done are going to get pulled into these groups to get high priority, useful things done for their organisation. In the same way that when you're in a consultancy, you're on a bench for a bit, and then you get deployed onto a client, and you do the thing, and then you come off the client, and you go to another client. It's going to be like that inside organisations. Of course, those are for transformation and change type roles, for BAU operational roles that, people will still probably move through career paths in similar, ways that they are now. But there'll be very, very much a democratisation, as I say, and a consultancy-based approach. And what I really hope, and something that I've done in my own work recently as well, is that we'll build, back to what I was talking about earlier around communities of practice, we'll build the ability for an organisation to sustain a change. We've got to move away from seeing transformations as projects, right? Hey, I'm going to come in and make a change, and I'm going to go away again. Yeah. And then the thing's just going to collapse in on itself, and then I'll come back and stand it back up. We've got to ask ourselves, why do organisations need transformations in the first place? What are the decisions cumulatively that have got them to this point? And what can be learned from the decisions that got them to this point? So let's make a change that's required. But what are the things then that we can build to make this thing self-sustaining? So we can do ourselves, in the nicest possible sense, out of a job, right? And we can go on to do other things inside the organisation or outside the organisation. Yeah. And for that, the answer for that is communities of practice and continuous improvement. Like building into teams a mindset of, Yeah, we're number one, but we will try harder.
Yeah. I had a conversation last week with the CAO who's previously run a big transformation at Aviva, and he said to me, you've done your job well when you make yourself redundant. And
exactly.
Yes, it's so true, isn't it? From a staffing perspective as well, because we've always had permanent staffing arm, and I've come into with contract staffing, and then we've opened up a consultancy service. But we initially have always just done augmentation, so just augmenting consultancy into existing teams and like deploying like a hit squad.
Yeah.
Then we moved more into the outcome-based space and opened it up as an offering. But then we've seen very little appetite for that approach, and a huge amount of appetite for just augmenting like specialists into projects and deploying them in on that basis rather than the latter. So yes, it's interesting to see kind of from an external perspective the same sort of patterns of appetite as what we see internally.
And have you seen that when people have been deployed on the org basis, that they have then tried to turn outcomes round, effectively delivering that outcome-based thing that you were trying to sell but didn't.
Yeah.
They did that through the staff org thing.
Yeah.
That's great. That shows you've got a good pool of people.
Yeah, for sure. That's when you're doing it well. But it's not ideal really, because then it still gives that client the full control of the project. They just sometimes it's the fact that they don't actually need that outcome-based approach. All they really need is bums on seats to deliver.
Yeah.
And I think that's becoming more and more popular. So it'd be interesting to see how that shapes up kind of from our side as well over the next few years. But thank you for coming on. It's been really interesting to kind of hear about your approach, and I completely agree with everything that you've said around what's important, what needs to be prioritised, and what makes businesses successful. So excited to see what's in store for you next.
Thanks.
It'd be good to kind of watch this back in a few years' time and see how accurate you are.
maybe
looks like.
let's do a debrief in a few years, and go, how wrong was he? Very wrong.
By that point, we'll have AI where we can just change the whole first podcast and edit it and make whatever's happened.
My AI will sit down with your AI and we'll go down the pub.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks a lot, Daisy.
Thank you.